Not really, but we're good.
All right.
We're gonna sit in awkward silence and just kind of wait for you to say something.
But we're not going to pray. We'll be sitting in awkward silence,
right.
but
Nice.
not praying.
That's right. We'll be looking at our phones.
Awesome. Well, I am excited to be here tonight to introduce these three guys and have the privilege of getting to work with them on their book, Never Pray Again. My name's Steve Knight. I do marketing for Chalice Press, the publisher, and hello everybody out there who's watching tonight. I'm gonna do a little interview here with these guys, and the first thing I'm gonna do is gonna let them introduce themselves. But I do want you to know that this is meant to be interactive, and so if you've got questions for them, post it in the comments on the Facebook event, post it in the comments on the YouTube live stream. I'll be checking those and bringing them into this conversation, and so hopefully you'll get your questions answered tonight. So, without further ado, who are you guys? And how did you meet? How did Two Friars and a Fool begin? Let's go back to the very beginning. Who wants to say?
I met Nick when both of us were moving into the same apartment complex at San Francisco Theological Seminary. He helped me carry armloads of our junk that we'd thrown on a pile in a trailer, and I helped him carry his carefully packed plastic bins. And I met Eric at San Francisco Theological Seminary because I ran a Dungeons & Dragons game for him and his wife and me and my wife and two of our friends.
Right on. And so that makes you Doug Hagler.
Yes, and I'm Doug Hagler. That is what makes me Doug Hagler. I got my identity in those moments.
Nice.
It's very true, really, really.
And for right now, I'm an interim pastor in the Philadelphia area in the Presbyterian Church.
Right on.
The real one, the PCUSA, not the fake ones.
Thank you for that distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Knives are coming out early.
For those who aren't already, raving fans, how long have you guys been together in this blogging, podcasting, partnership, collaboration?
So we've been blogging. Doug and I, at least, have been blogging for 8 years now. And we decided when seminary was kind of drawing to an end that we definitely wanted to keep this relationship and this collaboration. We collaborated in a variety of ways at the seminary, published a little student ragging on the administration of our seminary. So we wanted to keep going and collaborating on that. And one of the ways we decided we wanted to do that was to create what we call Two Friars and a Fool, which is a blog, virtual pub, podcast. It's been a few different things. Now it apparently also writes books, this entity that is quickly got spun out of our own control.
Yeah, so really it came from all those late night conversations that we had at seminary and all those sort of things. The things that you were raised in class and stuff, but then no one really takes the time to talk about. And so we did. We sat around afterwards or head down to a local bar or whatever and got to chatting about all kinds of different theological topics. And as we interacted and had fun, we just really enjoyed it. And so as we were going to leave seminary, we wanted to really make sure that element didn't just disappear or fade. And so we kind of created the online tool as a way to continue that collaboration and conversation that was already happening just naturally between the three of us, and then include others. So that's really like kind of the pub theme came from those 2 a.m. conversations that we'd have where you're arguing about the metaphysics of the universe and all those sorts of things, and it's kind of spiraled from there into all kinds of different things. But the thing that we really wanted to make sure that we did is that we were always generating new things, that we were doing new and thoughtful endeavors, that it wasn't just a place.
Not necessarily new to the world.
Well, yeah, that's true. But that's very true. But like really just in a way that, so that came from online video stuff, blog posts, the books, working with people like Carol Howard Merritt at God Complex Radio. There's been all kinds of different ways that we've done that over the years.
Basically, it was an excuse to use study leave money to get together.
Yep.
That's true.
Right on.
That was our guiding print. That was our founding principle, actually.
And the name Two Friars and a Fool, where did that come from? What does it mean?
Well, it's kind of the ongoing joke among the three of us in terms of who's the fool. And so we like to peg each other as that thing. And so it kind of naturally evolved. All of us are kind of lovers of olden times in different ways and shapes and forms. And it's sort of our own way of creating a little bit of personal mythology that represents us as people. And it was a fun kind of theme to use for the website and other things where you can really do a lot with the kind of old style pub kind of mentality. And so naturally beer comes from friars, so you must be friars. But really the real truth comes from the fool, so who can really tell truth to power, say things that other people couldn't. He was the only one in the old days that could say the truth to the king and not lose their head. So in some ways we want to be that for the church.
Right. Love it.
Not take ourselves too seriously.
No. It really helps. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we've valued, or at least I value a lot, is because it's not just one of us pontificating on a soapbox. We get to argue, and naturally it starts out where nothing is taken at just pure granted, that it's all kind of worked and featured and twisted and manipulated a little bit.
And you can each kind of hold each other, call each other on each other's crap.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's been about 7 years now that we've been doing all these things.
Yeah. But was it just a couple years ago when you were at the Unco conference and had this idea for this book, or what became the book?
Yeah, it'll be 3 years at this Unco this May. Since we had the idea. It was Unco 2011 when we had the idea. We were up late talking, as we do, and sharing that. I mean, sharing a variety of things. We were impressed really with Sarah Miles' book, Take This Bread, Sarah Miles' work, and the way that she had directly connected the Eucharist, the sacrament of the Eucharist, to an act of service. That this sort of ritual behavior took on new meaning by getting it sort of outside its ritual boundaries and applying it directly to a form of lived mission, lived service. And we wondered if we couldn't do that with other elements of worship and other spiritual disciplines and practices. And when it came to talking about prayer, we sort of realized that prayer, if you took the word prayer out, had that already built in. Different types of prayer of confession, if you take the word prayer out, just becomes confession. You just confess what's going on in your life, hopefully directly and immediately.
So for folks who maybe aren't familiar, set the stage. What is Unco? What is it like? What does it look like? What's the experience of that like for folks who haven't been?
So Unco stands for Unconference. Really, it's an open space forum that allows there not to be a presenter. Basically, the way I like to think about it is all of the times that you go to church conferences and you have the best conversations in the hallways between talks or over dinner, that this is a conference that eliminates the talks so that you have more time to have that real, honest conversation. So all of us who show up are the experts, are the ones who work together, are the ones who lead the discussions, who bring the topics. So there's no set theme. It's whoever's present in that particular thing. So most of the gatherings are somewhere between 50 and 75 folks. There's usually an East Coast and now a West Coast Unco each year. And you kind of create these conversations through a giant idea board and then link ideas together, and volunteers host those conversations. And then on the third day, we say, what can come of this? What has legs, as Carol likes to say. So it's a really generative process that just every year is fun, energetic, and engaging, and really speaks to where I'm at each time I show up, because it's about us.
Right. So you mentioned Carol Howard Merritt. Were you guys involved in the kind of the founding and the organizing of Unco?
We didn't go to year one. Year one was 2010. But ever since then, we've been involved and have been hosting. This year, we're helping to try and host Unco East at Stony Point. And it's a wonderful community because you don't really come and sit on a back bench and watch. There's no such thing as non-participating observers at Unco. So we were immediately sucked into getting involved in it, even though we weren't there at the first year.
Yeah, and so it was really a neat thing. I know the first year we went, I had no idea what it really was going into it. I mean, it had only happened once, and was really shocked. But it just speaks to the volumes of the people gathered. We got there on the Sunday night right before it started on Monday, and we kind of walk in the room, and there's a bunch of people hanging out. And Carol actually, like, I had never met her before. Like, I'd heard of her, knew kind of who she was. I had read her books. She comes walking across the room, and she walks up to me, and she goes, "Oh, so you must be Nick." And I was just like, "That's Unco, where you get to stand next to Carol Howard Merritt and just talk to her, because she's her." And it's a great kind of opening experience, and it really welcomes you into ownership of it too from moment one. Mm-hmm. So we can't not be involved with it now, because all of these people are our friends, are our colleagues, are our partners.
Right. I just have to acknowledge right now, Nick, that you experienced the birth of 2 children in the same week.
Yeah. So my son Ian was born on the 22nd. So, and then the book officially came out today. So it's been a hectic and a busy week. So if you hear fussing or crying in the background, that's going to be Ian. So he may make his first ever internet appearance tonight before we get done.
The crying could also be me.
That's right. We'll get to that, Doug. I've got a question for you.
Oh, good.
But so stay tuned for that, folks. This could be the celebrity baby appearance of Ian Larson. We'll see. So the book was sort of germinated at this conversation at the Unco Unconference, and it has this title: "Never Pray Again." It's provocative. What do you tell us about the title?
It's intended to be provocative. We bounced around a lot of titles, and I remember being an early advocate for Never Pray Again, because we were messing around with titles like
I hated it,
like Unprayer, or like clever, with slashes or colons or whatever in the title, and I was like, no, we should be really direct, and make the title as provocative as we can, but also within the limits of what we actually are willing to back up with the book itself. I think part of what the book is saying, and part of what Eric and I said at DePauw, is that we really do think that a person could live a rich, spiritual, religious life and never pray. Like that prayer is one option in and amongst hundreds of spiritual disciplines that a person might engage in, and that it's overprescribed, I think, in Christianity by a long shot, in my opinion.
Yeah, and not only is it potentially overprescribed, and not only could you live a deep and meaningful, fulfilling spiritual life while not praying at all, I think that prayer contains within it a danger, maybe not exclusive to prayer, but certainly prominent in prayer, which is that it's a highly passive activity that prioritizes the inner spiritual world versus your relationship with your neighbor, in which your beliefs and what's experiencing internally in your head are the most important factor in the whole experience. And I think that that's actually broadly true of American Christianity, that what's happening in your head, your beliefs, and what you feel is the most important thing about what it means to be a Christian. And I think it's kind of a poison to effective discipleship, because it keeps you from engaging in concrete mission with and for your neighbor. If it's possible for you to love God and hate your neighbor, you have a bad religion and you should stop practicing it.
Right on, right on.
We also, you kind of notice, what I really have grown to love about the title is it doesn't actually tell people, it doesn't stop at just trying to be a negative thing. Never Pray Again actually leaves open a lot of opportunities to do different things. So the tagline, lift your head, unfold your hands, and get to work, really speaks to saying what can come next. So we're not just ripping down something, we're also building and constructing newness in its place.
Yeah, the book is essentially, after the first page, we don't mention the word prayer ever again in the whole book. Like, the book is not focused on tearing down prayer. The book is taking prayer off the table and then looking at what would you do in that situation. I mean, it's a thought experiment. Say you could never pray, and think of situations where Christians commonly pray to accomplish things, and take the prayer part out, and then what are you left with? And that's the rest of the book. So it's very constructive. We didn't want to spend a whole lot of time ragging on prayer, because that's not really fun or interesting. And the question is always going to be, well, what do we do instead? And so we wrote a whole book about that.
Yeah, the whole book is what do you do instead. If you just take the premise, which we offer fairly simply early on in the book, that prayer might serve as an obstacle to a truly meaningful and powerful spiritual life. If you take that premise, then what follows is the whole rest of the book is just things you would do in place of prayer. And we take it and follow the liturgical structure of worship, the order of worship, and say, here's things we normally do in worship that we call prayer. What if we did these things not as prayer, and we did them as concrete actions with your neighbor, directly involving other human beings?
Right. So here's the thing that I found really interesting about the book, and I was actually surprised by, but I shouldn't have been surprised by it, in that the book is actually really pastoral. And what I mean by that is, there's a lot of really rich teaching and care and concern that comes through in your collective voices. The stuff that you share in the book, the personal stuff, and just the passionate stuff about how we're getting this wrong and how we need to have a course correction. It's all there, and I really felt like I was going to the church of two friars and a fool reading this book.
We hope that church never actually exists.
Shut your mouth.
If anybody out there wants to give us a bunch of money to build said church, we'll take it.
I will take a small amount of money to build said church.
We're not UCLA either, so if whatever his name is, the owner of the Clippers, wants to give us $3 million, we'll take that and go build a cool-ass church with it, and tell him he's an idiot, and do it anyways. So,
from a pulpit.
So you've got church experience, church ministry experience. You guys are in the trenches on a regular basis, and you're drawing from that experience. And I mean, you get to preach like this in the pulpit?
Yeah.
Your churches?
Yep, I do. I actually preached a sermon that was basically one of the chapters of the book, boiled down a lot. And partly that's because I'm an interim pastor, so everybody knows that no matter what I say, I won't be there forever. So I think I do have more leeway. But I mean, the things in the book are exactly the things that I say in conversation. They're the things I say from the pulpit. I think it's important for all three of us that all that stuff is the same. That you would see us in the pulpit, and that's what they're like. And see us, after hours with a beer, and there's probably more swearing than in the pulpit, but that's still pretty much what we're like.
Yeah. Actually, my church, Broadway Christian Church, where I'm the associate, the senior minister, unbeknownst to me, quoted from the book in his Easter sermon, and then he asked me to design a 8-week series here in Eastertide based on the book. So we're literally going to go kind of chapter by chapter through the book and preach, heal, beg, thank, praise. So it's going to be really cool.
That's great. So say a little bit more about that, how the chapters are laid out, and so people, what will people expect when they dig in, look at the table of contents?
As I sort of started to say earlier, that they're based on the liturgical structure of worship. We take types of prayer that we would say in worship, basically in the order that we'd say them. So a prayer of confession, we turn that into a chapter, and we title the chapters with the imperative forms of the verbs that we got from the type of prayer. So in a prayer of confession, we say the chapter title is confess, rather than praying to God what it is you need to confess, live your confession. And then we give a bunch of examples of, and sort of, I mean, it's more than just examples, it's fleshed out what we understand confession to be, and how that would look if it were to be expressed in your daily life rather than expressed in a verbal prayer said to God or to a priest. And we do that throughout the chapters. So the chapters are things like awaken, confess, praise, expel is fun, it's about exorcism, love, beg, heal, thank. They're imperative verbs based on types of prayers that Christians commonly pray, and we run with it that way.
When we were writing the chapters, we kind of laid them out not all of them hold perfect to this, but there's kind of a 3-stage relationship. It's like you and the thing, so it's like confession is for you, and then it's like community and confession, and then it's confession with God. That kind of way it builds through the chapter, and those are kind of each augmented by what we kind of naturally call asides. These are kind of little personal moments that each of us tell stories or examples that we've seen in media or culture or in our own lives that express kind of the avenue and idea that we're talking about in each particular chapter. So as you kind of work your way through the chapter, you really get a sense of how that confession would be lived out, so between you and others, you and yourself, and you and God, how that might play out. Yeah.
Well, now you said commonly prayed prayers or things. Expel.
Right.
Common, maybe in some strange corners. I shouldn't say strange. To explain expel for folks who haven't read it yet.
Partly I think, well, I'll speak for myself. I liked the challenge of writing a robust chapter about exorcism from the viewpoint of thoroughly postmodern, progressive, hyphenated Christians. And it is a very common thing. I mean, the fastest growing wing of Christianity on earth is the Pentecostal charismatic wing. And something that is central to that tradition is exorcism. And you can't read the Gospels without tripping over exorcisms on every couple pages. So it's less common in the PC USA, say. But I liked the challenge. I thought it was cool to try out, and it is a very common kind of prayer historically and globally, if not, domestically, I guess, for us.
Right. I mean, I think with expel in particular, that was less this is common in our experience, and more this should be common. And I stand by that one in particular. I think expel has some stuff to say that really convicts me. This is the kind of stuff I feel like we progressive Christians are really dropping the ball on, and could and should really do a lot more of. I think that demon possession, in the sense that we describe it in the book, is everywhere, and we're doing nothing about it, and that's terrible.
I would love to go a little bit further down that trail, because I love the progressive theology that you guys unpack through the entire book, but especially that chapter. And let's talk about a few of those things. What are some of those things that you name there?
Who's going to go? I guess I can. Really, we talked about, like, we kind of launch into the chapter starts with talking about, like, what do you as a thinking, articulating human being do with demons that are mentioned throughout Scripture? And we lean kind of heavily on, the works of folks like Walter Wink and others that sort of talk about demons as being principalities and powers in a way that are our own things that wrap us up inside and sort of tie us down, that kind of create things within us that speak to what we feel trapped by or bound up by. Demonic powers don't have to be kind of pointy-horned things that come and jump into your body, but they're really things that push our collective spirituality to a negative and bad place. What are those things that turn us away from the common good?
Right. I
know one of my
yeah.
favorite images from the chapter is we actually sort of, throughout the book, occasionally we do little story-like vignettes, and one of the favorite images was of like a contemporary exorcist going through your house and taking all of the things which, like, embody your connection to consumptive, wasteful, imperialist, colonialist culture that is America, and the trash and the baggage from your past and all the stuff that's getting in the way of you living actually a healthy, meaningful life, and just like taking it out and throwing it out on the front lawn. And that image is an image of exorcism, of literally throwing into the fire, into the trash heap, the material chains which have connected us to this whole system of living, which is just deeply destructive to ourselves, the world, our neighbors, everything.
Right on. Pamela Wilhelms talks about the difference between mechanistic systems and living systems. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the piece that you guys get into there, really, particularly the economic system, and you say some pretty strong stuff about that.
That we do.
But let's talk about the personal pieces too, because and I'll just start with you, Doug, because you share a piece about dealing with depression. Mm-hmm. As well as you said that the chapter on loving God when God is the enemy. Mm-hmm. Let me just read a couple excerpts.
Sure.
That I just loved. Behaving as if the cosmos was very good, as if creation was wholly beautiful, doing things for their own sake and loving people for their own sakes, has done me nothing but good. It opens the possibility that perhaps I am even wrong about myself.
Yeah.
I love that.
And that's talking about one of the aspects of depression as I experience it, and as it's a pretty standard experience, is you sort of have your intuitions are skewed. So if someone says you're a horrible person and will amount to nothing, then in my head that rings true. That has the intuition that is a deep cosmic truth has just been expressed about me. And then if someone says, oh, you're this interesting person who wrote this really great book, my intuition is you are a liar. You're a filthy liar, and you're just saying that to make me happy in my misery. And I've learned to identify those things as symptoms. I've learned, and it's very weird being a pastor where in most situations I have to trust my intuition. In terms of, if I'm doing pastoral counseling or if I'm visiting with someone and I have the sense that something's going on, or if I'm in a meeting and I feel like there's some sort of hidden conflict or something, I have to trust that intuition, or I had to learn to trust it more. But then about myself and my own life, I have to distrust my intuition. And so that's one of the things that example is talking about, based on my experience of depression and what it's like.
In my experience, there aren't a lot of folks, especially in the sort of the religious world, that are talking, honestly and openly about mental health stuff. So I thought that was really, really great that you shared that in the book.
And this is one of the things that kind of gets me. It was very frustrating and disheartening with regard to prayer, especially like as an adolescent and a young adult, is that if I had, say, leukemia, it's going to be chronic and ongoing and debilitating, but no one's really going to expect that prayer is going to fix it. I mean, people might still pray for me, but at least in my context, no one's really going to expect a miraculous cure. But when you talk about symptoms of mental illness, it's all in your head, and prayer is in your head as well. And so the expectation is that prayer fixes that kind of thing because it's less visible and more subjective. And that was my experience of being encouraged to pray more or pray differently or have people pray for me or whatever. And it never worked. It just made me feel worse. And so I had to go figure out something else to do to start to deal with this. And that's the case. I have a lot of interest and some passion for mental illness and how it's addressed or not addressed for the most part in the church. And more broadly, how it's my perception that people who are active in church are supposed to work very hard to pretend that everything's great because they love Jesus, and that's supposed to make everything great. And it doesn't. And there isn't even a good reason to think it would. But who would come to church and actually talk about what's really going on in their life, or cry, or show weakness, or yell, or be afraid? And that upsets me because I think church should be the one place you can do those things. Right. And it's like the opposite. So part of trying to address that is being open about stuff going on with me, I guess.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
I have to mention this because I'm excited about it. We have another new book coming out later this year from Chalice Press that is about mental health in the church, written by Sarah Lund, who's a UCC minister in Florida. And I think that's something that needs to get explored more. So I was grateful for your honesty and courage in sharing that in the book. I have one more question before, but we have some other questions that have been submitted. I want to make sure we get those in. But is any other personal stuff that you got, that Nick, Eric, that you guys wrote about that it was kind of a unique opportunity to kind of unpack in this book?
I mean, I just think that it kind of came at us in the writing process. One of the neat things about collaboratively writing together and working on the same kind of page is that I think we encouraged each other to kind of, at the moments where you might take something out of your own writing because it feels really personal, you had two people to say, no, that's great, leave that in there. And I know that when we wrote the love chapter especially, we kind of focus on the quintessential Christian love is to love your enemy, and that Doug wrote a large portions of the love the enemy within section, and I was just blown away by his ability to be honest. And I know that there was a moment where Doug kind of wanted to pull some of that stuff out, and it was like I was like, no, you can't mess with that anymore. And I hope that was true, like in sections that I wrote or things that I did. I got a lot of chance to share some of my experiences with CPE or clinical pastoral education. Stories like the one about the guy I met who was on methadone were those kind of moments and stories for me. And it was neat because you got to tell, with the way we structured the chapters with these like asides, you got to take a moment if you had that personal story to really just put it out there and not feel like you had to weave it into the text, which is kind of more didactic and teaching oriented, and yet still left room for stories. So
yeah.
Eric, anything you wanted to say there, or should I move on?
I think that's good. I mean, we tried to be direct and interesting throughout the whole book, not just in our theology, but also in our personal narratives, and hopefully that shows through, and hopefully that is what the readers enjoy and want, because that's what we have to give at this case.
Yeah. Well, it also speaks to what we talk about in the Confess chapter, which is really all about integrity. And so it would be really hard for us to write a book where we weren't being integrated with our own selves. So, like, we can't really...
It's easy to do that, but we shouldn't. Okay. I bet a lot of people write books that are not very integrated.
Fair enough. We didn't want to do it.
Just saying, like...
Right on. Well, let me jump back. I think this was in the love chapter, talking about loving God when God is the enemy.
Yep.
Yeah.
And let me read this excerpt. You guys write, "We are left alone in the darkness, betrayed by God. In this moment, what we truly believe is tested. Do we depend on God to be the one who really loves our enemies because we can't? Or have we learned to follow in Jesus' path and love even the enemy God who abandons us at our moments of greatest need?" Whew.
Who wrote that? Jeez.
I know. God.
Quotable.
Yeah, I think that, at least again for me, that reflects my experience in ministry and in chaplaincy and talking, being with people when terrible things happen. There's two easy things to jump to when something awful happens. One is God caused it, so it's a hurricane because of liberalism or whatever, which means God is a horrible monster. Or God didn't stop it and it just happened, which means that, is God culpable then? It's hard to not, I think, have the feeling that God is kind of like an enemy in those cases. And that's something that you're definitely not supposed to talk about. But I think it's an experience that a lot of people have.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things we say toward the end in that chapter is that, or I think it might have been maybe in the chapter after that, where we say that not only did we want to be direct in the book, but we wanted to lean toward surprise. And so we tried with each chapter, knowing that of course it's impossible to say something genuinely new, but to say what would maybe not be the thing that would automatically occur to you, because why waste your time reading a book that if it's going to be the thoughts you're going to have on your own anyway. So we really did in every chapter, and I think that's one of the better examples of it in the book, that try to find something to say about the subject matter that was surprising even to ourselves. That was like, this is not what you would normally hear about the subject, and not just for the sake of novelty's sake, but because I want to hear a way of framing the subject that, if the whole purpose is to get away from habitual orientation to prayer and to internal life practice, then the book hopefully should also pragmatically serve that purpose by also sort of jolting you, by sort of surprising you with a new angle on the same subject.
Yeah.
And so
yeah, I felt that way, when you talk about the quintessential Christian love being love for your enemy. Just that insight, not necessarily something like, yeah, I've heard that before, but it's not. It's still, I don't know, the spin on it was fresh, and it was a surprise. It was wasn't what I was expecting to see. And but this,
I think Doug gets a lot of credit for that, because Doug has taken on kind of his own practice of doing this thing where he has removed unnecessary theological language from his own vocabulary. So often in church we get used to saying things like in the sort of phrases that we just think we know what they mean, and no one ever actually explains what they're talking about to each other anymore. Mm-hmm. And so Doug has kind of taken all of that language out, and he can tell you more about that. But I think that really inspired us in the book to try and say things in ways that weren't just sort of canned responses, or didn't return to phrases that people were instantaneously familiar with. I mean, hopefully these aren't brand new concepts. The idea that Jesus tells us to love our enemies should not be new to Christians.
Right.
And even that it's essential. I mean, he says, you know, you don't get any credit for loving your friends and family, because who doesn't do that? You know, but it's loving your enemies that you get credit for, because that's actually very difficult, and very few people do that.
Right. And I think that the reason it was surprising is, you know, especially, you know, I've been very tuned into the missional church conversation, and in that conversation there's a lot of talk about loving God and loving your neighbor.
Yeah.
And love for enemy is sort of in a footnote.
Well, a key thing for me about love for neighbor is when Jesus is asked, who's my neighbor, he defines your neighbor as your enemy. I mean, the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's a thing that gets rehashed every time a preacher touches the parable, but just that very simple insight of the question is, who's my neighbor? The answer is your enemy. So love my neighbor means love my enemy. I mean, it really is. To me that is uniquely true of Christianity, that you know, everywhere, every culture around the world is going to affirm some form of love. Some form of love for family, some form of love for people near you and your environment, love for people who are like you, maybe even virtuous love for people who are unlike you but strangers or vulnerable, like the orphans and widows. But love for enemy, that's something that no culture really expects of you. In fact, the opposite. The job of every patriot is to love your people like you and hate your enemy.
Right on. Well, let's get to some of these questions before our time runs out here. Doug, you got a question from someone
from a friend of mine on Facebook.
Yeah, it says one of their favorite blog posts from Two Friars and a Fool involved the one biblical passage that you all would remove from the Bible for whatever reason. I was wondering what one biblical passage you each feel should be emphasized more than any other.
I'm gonna steal the first answer that comes to mind, which is the section in Matthew 25 where Jesus talks about essentially whatever you do for people, you do for me. Whatever you refuse to do for people, you refuse to do for me. And just to hold that up and take that, I mean, no one's a literalist about that. You know, they're a literalist about six-day creation. But they're not a literalist about, if I refuse to help someone, I am refusing to help Jesus. Like, that is, you know, and it's and the cool parallel to that is, if I help someone, I'm helping Jesus. It kind of it sort of echoes back to the monastic communities in the desert in the Middle Ages who were instructed to welcome every visitor as if it was Jesus. You know, and so they would make this huge deal. For welcoming any random stranger who came along, and that's, you know, that makes sense. And I think if churches just spent like a year highlighting that and talking about it, I think it would be really challenging but really interesting.
I mean, my go-to passage on in the New Testament or in the Bible in general is from 1 John that God is love. It's one which is actually very pastoral in a lot of ways, except that I think that if you just keep sort of hammering that again and again, every time you juxtapose it with an example of Christian behavior or supposed belief in divine behavior, which is in some way unloving. It just comes back to it's just sort of the resounding hammer blow of, oh, so, you know, love our neighbor but hate gay people. No, God is love. You know, love this but do that. No, God is love. You know, well, it's okay for me to sort of destroy the environment and be greedy. No, God is like, there's no, like, that sentence is just simple and there's no exceptions and you can hammer absolutely everything. Like, there's no brooking any nuance or vagary there that allows for an interpretation which is not love, which is not loving. And I mean, yes, you then have to describe what you mean by love and all of that, but at the same time, even when you begin to have to describe what loving is, it means that someone's already begun to have to try and make an excuse for something, because no one doubts when they know what it feels like to feel loved. And they know what it feels like to feel not loved.
I guess for me, I don't know, my kind of mind goes to two places, so maybe I'll mention both of them. The first is the Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, because I think it leans two ways. The first is that the eunuch is entirely other, and yet welcomed and encouraged by the community of faith. And the bounds of the community of faith itself are broken in order to welcome him into it. The nearest water that they find is the waters of baptism for him. And then the second would be that kind of age-old, I didn't come to give life, but give life abundantly. Because I think really, if you look at that, it's a challenge to go out and do the things that Christ did to bring about abundant life. That you have to act your way into abundant life. That abundant life isn't just something that's laid upon you, but is actually part of the challenge and the quest that Christianity becomes.
Right on.
I don't know, maybe in our capitalist culture, though, the passage that we should all really be reading is Jesus turning over the tables of the money changers.
Yeah.
All right, we have another question here. Do you guys have examples of ways that churches might swap prayer for action?
A simple one that came up in conversation at DePaul that I think is a good example is Eric and I have both worked in food service. And so one of the things you know is if you've ever waited tables is that Christians are legendary as the worst tippers ever as a group. So like Sunday brunch is, you know, the worst shift if you're waiting tables in a lot of places, and that actually holds up, unfortunately. So one of the things we talked about is how instead of saying grace before a meal, that you make the decision to behave graciously to the people around you. So you thank everyone for joining you for the meal. Like, don't thank God for them, thank them. Thank your server for their service. Go back to the kitchen and freak people out and thank whoever cooked your food. And be like, that was delicious. You did a great job. Call the manager in and say, you really run a great restaurant here, and I enjoyed my time. And you know, and I can guarantee that is the only time that will have happened, maybe in a year, to most of those people. But you know, many Christians who go out to eat and don't tip very well probably say grace. But trading those things in is one of the things we talk about in the book, and also just a very simple thing that that I've done and I've found very meaningful. Like, people are just shocked that you're thanking them and you don't know what to do with it, but seem pretty happy.
Here's one for me. If you're on Sunday morning and you're a pastor like me, you receive a bunch of prayer requests from people, and 95% of those prayer requests are prayer requests for healing. They're for members of the congregation or for family members of the congregation who are sick or in the hospital or things like that. And I would challenge churches. Some churches do this well, but a lot of churches don't do this well. To put together a board of deacons, this office that we've heard of, that involves going and visiting the people who are sick and who are needing care. And so on Sunday morning, instead of drawing up a list of names of people we can pray for and having a prayer chain or a prayer list which frequently devolves into a gossip chain. Have instead a group of people who take that list of names and go and visit them, and bring them casseroles, and stop by the grocery store to pick up things they need or whatever is on the way. That ministry alone would keep a dedicated group of 20 people in every church busy from now until they die, and would be profound and moving, and would make every person in the church better Christians.
I think we got this question quite a bit, and especially when we were kind of alpha testing some of the content, and we were sending it out to some of our friends and folks to read through it. And so we actually put at the end of each chapter like practical things that you can just go out and do, and most of them would apply fantastically to the church. The one that Doug mentioned is actually in Thank. It's the first one right there on the top, in terms of what experiment you might do, what ways you might actually go about doing these things. So I think that there's like 3 or 4 per chapter in the book. But I think the one that I would actually encourage churches to do the most with might be one that we mentioned in Awaken, which is the idea of skipping church or other regular spiritual practices, and go volunteer somewhere instead, to take and compare the experiences that you have when you actually go out and help someone, rather than gathering together as a community to talk about the problems that are out there in the world. It's really hard to do. I mean, it's really a difficult thing to try and convince a church. I mean, I can't, oh my goodness, it'd be years of work to try and convince our congregation that's about 450 people on Sunday morning to do that. But just imagine what you could accomplish in 1 hour with 450 work hours involved in it. I mean, that's
there's a program at least in the Philly area, and it might be national too, called The Church Has Left the Building. And it's like one Sunday a year, churches just don't go to worship, and they do like what we're talking about. They go out, and everyone in the church picks a project, and then they kind of talk about what they do, and they have on their sign, church is closed today, we're at the food kitchen or whatever. And that's something that it's only once a year, so you can do it during the summer when it's kind of slow most places anyway, or Christ the King Sunday, where pastors are always on vacation and nobody comes, at least in my experience. And and maybe sell your church on, let's just try this one time. We're not going to cancel worship, but we're going to do it once, and we're going to come back and talk about it. And you can look at, there's a website for it. You can look at videos of other churches doing it, and that might be a way to kind of ease them into the idea.
Well, yeah.
There's one more, and I've actually done this in my church here, which is we swapped out our prayer of we're Presbyterian, so we say a prayer of confession every week. We swapped out our prayer of confession for a time, and this made them so uncomfortable, but we did this for all of Lent. And you had to turn to your neighbor and confess whatever it was that you needed to confess that week, and your neighbor had to hear the confession and then offer you a declaration of forgiveness and then swap and do it again. It took like 7 or 8 to 10 minutes, but I found that actually over the course of Lent it got longer. People they got more willing to confess and spent more time doing it, and much better than any prayer I could have written for them to declare to them what I think their sins may be, our sins may be. Much better than any rote prayer. I mean, some of those prayers have good language and value that they remind us of things maybe we wouldn't think of on our own. But the actual discipline of turning to your neighbor and saying, "Wow, this is the crap that went down in my week. This is what I've got to tell you about my life and what I'm actually living like." It's hard.
I can tell you, as someone who works in youth ministry, that is actually really, teenagers embrace that pretty heavily. One of the accidents of my early years of youth ministry was I started just teaching Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster, and so we did a lot of those things. So we just literally set a chair in the front of the youth group one night to do confession, where teenagers, I don't know what, now I can't even imagine doing this, without having some concept that it would, like now I would totally doubt that it would work, but we just set a chair in front of the youth group, and literally kid after kid, we spent 2 hours with kids just sitting in that chair confessing to their peers, like, this is the shit that's going on in my life.
Wow.
And it was just really cool. And I just think we don't do that in church. We don't teach that that's the way confession should really be done, and we don't actually provide avenues. We don't actually put a chair in the room to do that from.
Right.
So,
right.
But I think it can be done. I mean, it can be totally done in corporate setting.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, 2 more quick things. I have to, before we wrap up here, I want to respect everybody's time and your time, guys. I want to give a shout out to Meredith Gould, who's been watching us and posting lots of great comments. I don't see a question from her, but she's excited because she's working on a book right now about spiritual practices for the 21st century. With the tagline, "The world does not need yet another book about praying and meditating." So she's resonating with you guys. Nice. And the message of never pray again. Last question, and some people know about this already because they supported the Kickstarter project. There is a coloring book, a companion coloring book to go with the Never Pray Again book.
Because that's a standard thing that theology books come with, right?
Yeah.
Coloring books.
All the decent ones.
We got the question.
Church Dogmatics had a fantastic coloring book, by the way.
Oh, there it is. Nick's got it.
Yep. So here's the coloring book in my hand, literally going out to Kickstarter backers within the next day or 2. It's been slow with a 7-day-old in the house to try and package these all up, but they're pretty much ready to get out now. So they should be arriving into mailboxes any moment. Big old coloring book things.
Okay, so you can and the exciting thing is you can now order the Never Pray Again book and get the coloring book bundled with it for free.
Yep.
At chalicepress.com. If you weren't part of the Kickstarter campaign, you can go to chalicepress.com and search for the Never Pray Again kit and get that while supplies last.
Yeah.
The question from Don is, what is the deal with the coloring book?
So we were the deal with the coloring book is that we were trying to figure out a way, because I had some success with Kickstarter with another unrelated writing project, and so we were trying to figure out ways to promote Never Pray Again. And so we had some cool ideas, and then we realized that those ideas might require some money, and we don't have any money. And so we thought we would get someone else's money and use that to promote the book. And a really good venue for doing that is Kickstarter. So we designed the coloring book to be what we would kickstart because it's hilarious. Like, that's why, because it's hilarious. At least to us. We did the Kickstarter.
We have heard folks at Chalice Press were literally laughing out loud reading this thing. So
yeah, it's really, I think it's funny. And even if it isn't funny, it's funny that we're doing it. So it's a double win. And so we kickstarted the coloring book as a way to get people's money to become our money, and then we would spend that money to promote Never Pray Again. That was the entire plan.
And so if you helped support us through the Kickstarter, we love you. You're amazing.
Yes.
You're awesome.
Yes. It's a ton of fun, and
the support that you gave us through the Kickstarter not only, of course, got the coloring book printed, which you did, but also helped us print stickers and some coasters and do a little bit of advertising and promotion for Never Pray Again, and hopefully eventually maybe some website changes and stuff. Mostly, though, it just helped us to feel good about ourselves and realize that we are worthy human beings because you gave us money.
We do owe a big shout out to our friend Will Meacham too, whose art is featured throughout it. He took our crazy ideas that prayer pushers in alleyways and vampires and turn them into wonderful drawings that are entirely inappropriate to hand to your 5-year-old to color. But we highly encourage you to do it anyways.
Yep. Yes, good asterisk there on the coloring book, Nick. And I don't have the print copy, but we do have the ebook. Can you see that? Where is it?
Oh, it just blanked out. It just gave up on you. There we go.
There it is.
Nice.
Folks, that's what we're talking about. You want these guys to feel good about themselves. Go buy the book. Show them that you care, that you love them. ChalicePress.com. If you order it through the publisher, they get a better cut of the royalties. That's just that's just part of the deal. So you can shop at Amazon or wherever you'd shop, but if you order it from ChalicePress.com, I will love you in addition to them loving you.
Or conversely, get really angry about the book and buy the book to shout at or to show to your friends and tell them how angry you are.
If you need to burn them in effigy, we can send you copies in multiple.
Yes.
As long as you pay for them.
We can send them bulk.
Yes, we'll buy boxes of this heretical book and burn them in the town square.
Yeah, put the pictures up on. Well, we could set up a Tumblr for the pictures of people burning our books.
That could go viral.
It could.
Brilliant.
Oh, I think it would.
Guys, I love the book. Like I said, it is progressive theology. It is fresh. It's insightful. It's pastoral. Thanks for writing it, and thanks for this conversation tonight.
Thanks for hosting, Steve.
Yeah,
You'll be here plenty on the internet lately.
Yep. Love you guys. Oh, blog tour. Let's mention that.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Guys around the internet, blog tour is kicked off today with Carol Howard Merritt at the Christian Century. Yeah. Carol.
Carol is like our patron saint. We have little icons of her around our necks.
Willing or no. Yeah.
All right.
There's a lot of great people who are going to be in that blog tour.
Yes.
Richard Beck at Experimental Theology, Landon Whitsitt, Andrew Root, Bruce Race Chow, Daniel Kirk, and James McGrath, Julie Clausen, just Katie Mulligan, a whole bunch of awesome people who are really too good for us. Hugh Hollowell, who, like, we are not worthy of these wonderful people being willing to say some hopefully kind things about the book, but at least honest things about the book.
Yeah.
Also, if you're not familiar, hopefully this could maybe turn you on to a few more blogs and people that you should be reading, because we went to all those folks that we look up to and that we really value on the interwebs, and we begged and pleaded with them to do us favors. So they really, hopefully you might, when you read our thing or see us promoting it, you can also then go read their other stuff.
Because we are definitely writing their voluminous coattails.
Yes.
Marion McKibben,
in every case. So
best-selling Chalice author this last year.
Yep.
Right on.
All
right, guys. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you again soon.
Adios.
Bye-bye, Internet.